Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Westhill, you made what I thought was an important point, the gist of which was we shouldn't underestimate discrimination where it exists, and we should call it out and fight it. But it's also important not to find discrimination where it does not exist. I'm wondering, so you and Congressman Donalds, both black men who grew up in the South, I wonder if either or both of you would care to briefly address, I mean, I'm sure you've seen and experienced discrimination in your lifetimes. Could you just reflect on how important it is that we get this right? In other words, see discrimination where it exists and fight it and not choose to find it where it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. Thank you very much for the question, Senator. I think it's terribly disempowering if we tell young minority kids in this country that there's discrimination everywhere, there's racism everywhere, there's bias everywhere, that it's institutionalized, that you're going to see it at every turn. That's terribly disempowering. Why would you want to really try your best and succeed and achieve when you know you can't do it anyway? When you're being told that over and over again? I think that overestimating bias or racism or discrimination is terribly disempowering and is not helpful. What we really should be doing is putting our finger on exactly what that is and being careful about the way we speak. I think the dictionary definition of discrimination is something very akin to intentional prejudicial treatment. Disparate impact is not that. That is a disparate, that is a gap in outcomes. Okay.
Congressman?
I agree with what the gentleman said. The only thing I would really add to it, Senator, is if you're going to get into issues associated with what the outcomes are, let's take home ownership, for example. Well, there's a lot of criteria that goes along with it. Number one, what's your credit score? Because if you have a 700 credit score, it's much easier to qualify for a home loan versus if you have a 600 credit score. Number two, what's the value of the home you're trying to buy? Number three, do you have a down payment for the home you're trying to buy? If you take a look at home prices throughout the United States, what's happening is they actually are rising in part because the material to build a home is rising. So if your income level is X, but the cost of the home continues to rise, that's going to have a negative impact overall on your ability to acquire the home. If you want to get into the situation of looking at money you want to borrow for a small business, and one of the things that we are talking about is, are there impacts on disadvantaged communities, minority communities, because of the way banking is structured in the United States right now? I would say, yeah. But that fault lies here on Capitol Hill. Because like I said in my testimony, since the passage of Dodd-Frank, community banking in the United States has been eviscerated. So if you're trying to get a business loan, typically how that works is you have a relationship with the lender in the local community bank. If community banks are gone, what's your relationship? Right. And the Wells Fargo checking account is not a banking relationship. That's a place where you deposit your money. As a former Wells employee, I can say that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Empirically, there's no disputing that after Dodd-Frank, the launching of new community banks in America simply stopped. It just ended. Mr. Westhill. You in your testimony, you pointed out that disparate impact theory is actually in tension with the constitutional guarantee of equal protection because it promotes race-conscious decision-making. Could you elaborate on that at all?
Sure. So basically what you're doing, if you're telling regulated entities that they have to get the outcome right, there's going to be a look, right, at the skin color, at the ethnicity, at the gender, what have you, of the individuals that are asking for a loan or whatever the situation is, because they're trying to avoid liability. That actually encourages racial discrimination. It doesn't do away with racial discrimination. Think about that hiring manager, for example, who at a large bank needs to get his numbers right in terms of the diversity initiatives that the bank has launched. We've heard about something like this fairly recently. And so they're looking at the individuals that they're interviewing more closely for their skin color. And it doesn't always mean that those individuals are getting the job or getting the loan either.
Right, and I wonder if Congressman or Mr. Westhill would comment on this. So we know that the CFPB used flawed data and methodology in the past. Now they're claiming to have more authority to expand the use of disparate impact. What's the net effect that if they get their way, if the CFPB gets its way, what's the net effect on the cost and the availability of credit and financial services in minority communities, in your view?
Oh, I'm gonna tell you right now, the cost is gonna skyrocket, because what you're gonna do is you're gonna have to bring in, frankly, more middle managers into every banking institution to deal with the new loopholes that CFPB is going to create. Everybody's gonna have to double check and triple check boxes. All that does is add more cost to delivering credit into these communities, or any community for that matter, in the United States. And at the end of the day, as somebody who underwrote credit, so I did this as a living, everything that you lend has a cost to the bank. And if the costs are prohibitively more expensive because of the unintended consequences of a regulatory burden from the CFPB, which, by the way, is still unconstitutional in my opinion, then what will happen is the cost will be borne by the consumer in higher credit costs. And if you're talking about people in the United States who are at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, the burden will fall on them more than anybody else. And you might actually dry up lending opportunities in the process as well.
Yeah, I was just going to make that point. I think not only are costs going to skyrocket, as Congressman Donalds suggested, it may be the case that services are just not provided at all. It's too cost prohibitive, or the liability is too great to even provide the services, and it's going to fall disproportionately on minorities, senior citizens, immigrants, individuals who can't afford to have that sort of scenario play out.
Thank you very much.